Hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where you always learn something new. I'm Rick Zanotti, and I'm joined today by my friend, our co-host, the Scott. Her name, Lesley Price. She works with www.learnappeal.org.uk. Do check them out. That's your homework after this. Check out that website. And Lesley, how you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. As I was saying before the show, I managed to see my new little grandson yesterday, which was very exciting. And he's discovered swings for the first time.
He could be Torrent of the jungle.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. But
They're
it's
fun.
just nice when they start getting that little bit older, and his little face when he's going backwards and forwards on a swing is just absolutely priceless. It really is.
That sounds good. Well, hey, also in studio, we've got Harold Muliati. He's producing the show and running the video switcher. Our guest today for part 2, we've got Dr. Susan Friedman. She's back on. We're going to continue the subject from last week, this time on project management and more. eLearnChat begins now. This show is sponsored by Relay Corporation. Digital learning development, media development, corporate video, management consulting, and more. Visit us at www.relate.com. Thanks. And we are back, and in that center position of power again, we've got Dr. Susan Friedman. Hey, Susan, how are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you?
Pretty good. Well, you had one show last week, and you got dragged into a second one today. Isn't that good?
Sure.
So we had a lot of topics we went over last week, and all that talk we did, we only covered 3 of your topics. So we've got more to talk about today, and this time I think we were going to focus a little bit more on project management, some of the issues there, some of the things to do, and eventually get to the people part of project management, SMEs, and all that. So where would you like to start today?
Well, I thought we would start just broadly. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I thought we would start just very broadly with project management types, because I worked in different organizations and there's different styles of project management. Now, generally how project management works is something I don't want to go into great detail about, because that is everywhere, right? You can always find out more about it. But from a designer point of view, I think what's really interesting to me as I look back over these different topics is that the last time we talked about the global aspect of work, when you're working with people with different cultures, I'm wondering if I should unplug my earbuds. But
No,
as you're working
fine.
with
Earbuds
people
are fine.
with different,
Yeah.
Is it fine? Okay.
No, your earbuds are fine.
As you're working with, okay, I'm sorry, I apologize. As you're working with people with different cultures, whether or not they're located in another country or not, it's whatever their background is and their frame of mind is, or their orientation. Different project management frameworks might be complementary to that, or perhaps not. So I think that there's, like for instance, a sense of time. When you have a more of an agile framework, that's a very iterative, do a little bit and test it, And that could be a different, how does that work with certain cultures, right? As opposed to like more of a waterfall style of project management, or maybe a lean style of project management. So I think that that's an interesting aspect. And one of the things that's helpful is to know who's on your team and know what kind of style, what their background is, and what kind of style that your organization really covers. What is the typical framework in which your organization operates? So those are the kinds of things and that I think are interesting with the different frameworks that are out there. So you can learn a framework, but then what about the people that are working on your team within that framework? And then what about the organization, and what is their typical style of project management?
Now, question for you, because a lot of times with project management, it becomes, especially in the e-learning arena or any kind of media development, it doesn't require the extent, usually, depends on the projects, of project management that you might have in other development or construction or other types of environments where there's a lot of moving parts and a lot more dependencies than there are in what we do. Here we might have 3, 4, 5 dependencies, not normally more than that, because you've got designers, maybe graphic artists, maybe video people, sound people, and they all may affect each other or not, just depending. Do you find that when you're working on short projects, of which a lot of the projects in e-learning tend to be short, that you don't have to do as much, you can almost do list management, and that's good enough, versus when you have a lot of people on a project that's large, where you have maybe it's not a 1 month, it's a 6-month project, and there's a lot of pieces to it. Do you find there that the project management type really plays more of an interest?
It seems to me that it depends on who's running the project. I've worked with suppliers where they are doing e-learning projects, but the project management is coming from the organization itself.
Right.
And they're going to drive how that works, where the milestones are, how we're proceeding, what's the style within which we're proceeding through the project. So that's one thing that's an interesting aspect, is the interface of the organization and then the supplier, the person doing the work.
This is where you get within e-learning when it actually becomes interesting, because your customer, so most people in an organization, their customer is external to the organization, but with learning technologies, e-learning, training, or whatever, the customer is actually internal to the organization. And even within an organization, there can be lots of different systems and processes in different parts of the organization. And it's not until you start working across the whole organization, as we do in LearnTech, that you think, good gracious, everybody is working to a different system here. Do they even know that these different systems exist? And by the way, should I put up my hand and tell them?
Yeah. Well, they may not know, right? So
yeah,
you may have visibility into a certain part and how a certain part works, but then you are working with other aspects and they might work very differently. That's probably especially true with very, very large organizations.
Yeah.
Now, when you've worked project management, what kind of tools did you use? And any particular ones? Like, a lot of people still use Microsoft Project, but I found Project, for example, that takes more time to manage project than it does to actually manage the project. It's sort of interesting. That was one of the first tools I used. But what tools have you folks been using for like project management to handle these kind of projects?
There's PWA, right? Project Web App. That's the most recent one I've used. And then there was another one, and the name escapes me, but there was another one we used in the Agile framework, where it was a lot of maintenance. To your point, there was a lot of statusing, and I agree with it. You have to have that visibility. Different stakeholders are looking at the project and how we're progressing, and how how the budget's coming along, and so forth. So it is important to have these tools, but it's important to be versatile and know the foundational things that you need to communicate, right? People are interested in whatever tool you're using. They're interested in what is the status of the project, right? What are the risks? Where are you against timeline? What do you expect to finish? I mean, if you know those fundamental things that you need to communicate that other people are looking for, then you can raise those up. And when you come across barriers, much like many of the ones we're talking about here, those would be listed as risks, right? And maybe some help needed. They will be able to help you and support you as you go through a project. So they are wonderful to have, those tools, and to be able to have that visibility surfacing so that you can get all the support that you need to make a project run successfully. So those are a couple of the tools I've used.
No, it makes sense. It makes sense to me that I think one of the big things that, certainly in my experience in working with e-learning, learning and development, training and development, whatever you want to call it, across not just internally within an organization, but externally within other organizations, the key thing is communication, which is just exactly what you've said. The key thing is communication. And if that breaks down, all it takes is one little chip out of the pyramid or the cube, and if you don't make sure that you know the impact of that, it can have huge repercussions that can go on for a long, long, long time. I don't know if you find that as well.
Well, Susan,
and that might be especially. Oh, go ahead, Rick.
No, I was just going to say part of the project management cycle, if you will, are also the status meetings, the either weekly or bi-weekly, depending how big the projects are or how sensitive time is. Those are real important to have to make sure that you've got people communicating, like Lesley said, on a constant basis. Where are we? Any problems? Anything going wrong? Everything going right? Are we good? Let's move on. And how much content's being reviewed, how quickly they review it. What we run into a lot as vendors when we go in is the wait and hurry up syndrome. We're fast, but we wind up waiting forever for people to get back to us. Like reviews. We got to get reviews done. Right. Months go by.
Right, but Rick, what you're talking about too is all, potentially reviews is bad news.
Yeah.
I think that one of the things that the HR, L&D, e-learning, LearnTech, whichever you want to call it, are not good at sharing is good news.
Yeah.
We're all in everything in organizations. They're very good at sharing bad news.
Right.
But sometimes it's actually just the right thing to do to share good news. And then people think, wow, this is actually worth my while. This is worth doing. This is worth the effort.
Well, yeah. And also the good news is even when you're having the status meetings, part of it is to figure out where you are, if something's missing, somebody's not getting back to you, or just to say, hey, everything's on schedule, on time.
Yeah.
We've gotten everything. Hey, let's keep it up. We'll see you next week.
Yeah.
I think that's excellent. It's an excellent point because it's really important for the team to see their successes and their accomplishments. That does help move people forward. And they want to, it creates a sense of wanting to do more, I think. Feeling really good about the work you're doing.
And it's funny, one of the most fun things we ever hear from people is we have a meeting and maybe we've called a meeting or something. And as we go through the meeting, we're done in 10 minutes and we had an hour schedule. I go, well, folks, you just got 50 minutes of your life back. And they're so happy.
Yeah.
It's just amazing when you tell somebody you got some time back. It's amazing in big organizations how happy they are for that. That's good news. So it's a simple thing, but yeah.
Yeah,
true.
It's simple pleasures, but actually sharing that everything is on track, everything is going well, it's all good. But people, when they come into meetings, are so used to when they walk in the door, they think, oh, here we go again. What are they going to tell us now? And when you then go in and it's good news, people leave with a smile on their face and they say, yeah, that was, what we're doing's positive. What we're doing's worth it.
Mm-hmm.
This is good, especially when you share that good news higher up the organization, because that's another thing that very often people who work in our environment don't do, because they're stuck under an umbrella where there's the
Right.
the top level, and then that top level maybe head of HR and whatever. But if you can get above that and share it with the people at the top of the organization, and they then feed back, hey, thanks guys, this is brilliant that you're doing such great work, can't wait to see what's happening next. To me, that actually sends such, I don't know about you, Susan, but to me that sends such a strong positive message.
But there is one thing that happens, Susan, and you can probably talk to this a bit. In the L&D world, in a lot of companies, the L&D departments are a little afraid to deal with the upper management. They don't like going there. And there's no difference whether you're dealing with lower, middle, upper management. They're people like anybody else. They have different things they report to, or they need, or they require. But there is a certain fear in many organizations of letting things be known, which is a real problem, because at that point, if things aren't known up the chain when they should be, then surprises can happen, and nobody likes surprises on projects, especially bad surprises.
Yeah. That's very true. And I think regarding the recognition, I think recognition is really important, but also being sensitive as to how people like to be recognized, whether it's more appropriate in an organization to be recognized, to make it culturally appropriate, to be recognized as an individual, or to be recognized as a team, because different cultures have different points of view about that. And I've seen a team do really well, and I was on that team, and I knew that some people really pulled a lot of weight, and other people pulled their weight, but not to the extent of others, but everybody was treated equally. There was no difference with how people, were sort of emphasized over another. So I think that's knowing that. It took me a little bit by surprise when I saw that for the first time. But then I looked at the culture and I said, that's the way they do it. That's appropriate for them. So it's very interesting to know those nuances. I have now personally seen a lot where people are not afraid to go to upper management and so forth. I think communication streams should always be pretty fluid and transparent. I think there's a real problem if you don't have that.
Right.
So,
and that's a cultural issue with the company.
Yeah, that could be. I think anybody in the leadership space should really be good at that kind of communication and addressing problems when they come about. One of the things that comes up problem-wise is unstable processes, right? When we're talking about communication. And one of the things, that's a great example of it. When you have something in the middle of change and you're trying to manage a project in the middle of that change, that's where communication really hits, really the rubber hits the road on that. If something shifts when you're trying to maybe develop a process and you're trying to maybe implement software, or you're trying to change some kind of policy, or something culturally changes, a lot of times you'll have people trying to figure it out while you're trying to do the solution. And I can imagine that Relate would have had these situations where you're doing well, and then all of a sudden you shift and there's a change, and you have to make some kind of correction in what you're creating, so that you can keep up with what's happening, and then by the time the change is actually realized and coming to fruition, then you'll be able to have something ready to release.
And we find it happens quite a bit, where you'll start a project and halfway, a quarter way, even at the end, things change. And it's normally a communication issue that nobody was informed of the change, all the meetings and everything, and nobody brings it up. Then at the end they go, oh, wait, we forgot there's a whole mess of changes that just came in. And your head drops and it's like, but that happens. It does happen. And and it's a lack of planning many times. It could be a manager, it could be a user, it could be just a lot of things. In some companies, and we're talking even very big companies, some users are kind of historical in nature. They've been there so long and they know every process so well that everybody's afraid to say anything because that one person owns it all. And you have to consider what happens if that person quits, or that person for whatever reason is laid off, or that person dies, or whatever, gets sick, and the company has no backup. And we're talking large companies. We're not talking multinational sometimes. And they have one person who knows just way too much and hasn't shared. That becomes a project manager.
Or you get people like me that used to then go and knock at their door and say, "Excuse me, where's the update? You haven't told us this. What's happening next?
Right.
I think my bosses used to absolutely dread it when Lesley came and knocked on the door because they thought, "Oh God," and she'll actually come in with all the due diligence, with all the evidence. So I didn't just go in with, one or two little bits of paper. I'd been through everything and could say, "And you didn't do, and you didn't do it, and why didn't you, and why haven't we?" And so, I was the person that the bosses absolutely dreaded getting the knock on the door from. Dreaded it.
Yeah, that's funny.
But it worked.
Yeah. So Susan, what comes out of project management next? In other words, we've got the project, it's being managed, things are going well. What kind of things? You mentioned, I think in some of the notes that you sent us, about SME availability, that's a real project management killer. It can really throw things out the door. What happens there?
A lot of times it's true. There are competing priorities in an organization. And you can set up sessions where you learn more about, the content, what people need to learn. And maybe people don't show up for those sessions. Or maybe you're trying to even kick off a project and you just can't because people can't make it. You might be dealing with different time zones where you're meeting at 6 a.m., or something like that. And that's difficult for some people, but okay for others. So SME availability is a big issue. And I think finding ways for the SMEs, one, pay attention to time zones and things like that. And maybe that's a tactical issue. But finding ways for SMEs to really see the value of the work being done. And that could be more of a motivational issue. So learn a little bit about motivation. I would encourage everybody to do that because it's so foundational with any kind of thing you're trying to do in an organization or with work, especially project management. So hopefully you can get people to really see, you could work risk and benefits. You could help them with value. What happens if we don't actually accomplish this, right? What happens if people don't know? What happens if people aren't as good as you are? And give them sort of this thought of, I really have something to contribute to our organization. What I have is important to share. And then they'll make the time. They will figure something out in their schedule to show up for you, to help you. So that's one recommendations I can make. You might have to split it up. There's a methodology by which you could actually interview different people separately, right? Because it might be hard to get a group together. So maybe you individually get information and then you collectively bring it all together to represent the whole picture of what you're trying to deal with. So that could be an approach you take, and it's all work on you, but could be a way to not have me unavailability in a meeting where you have 5 or 6 meetings together. So it's another approach that might be helpful. Then you can present it to them and they can view it and structure it up, in an outline or something, and then they could say, "Oh, does this make sense?" It could be an interesting conversation, and maybe that might help them be a little more curious about who knows what in their peers, right? That could be an interesting conversation too.
How do you give subject matter experts, how do you give them, or how do they gain credibility within the organization? Because within the organization, when you're creating content, we absolutely rely on our subject matter experts. But I'm also very aware that, what happens if people in the organization think they actually don't know their stuff? Why have they
Well, I
got
think,
them working on this?
well,
Is that
I
something you
think
come
it's,
across?
um, I think that the people who do the work are who is important, right? So I think there's a spread of different ways you can look at credibility. One is there's processes and procedures, right? Who is really knowledgeable about those processes and procedures? It might be the management, it might be like somebody who's really uh, in line with enforcing those in a sense, or making sure people are doing the work that, according to a process. It could be the people actually doing the work. I think that there's a lot of ways you can collect information from people who do the work, right? So there's qualitative research methods is generally what I would look to. There's observations, there's, think alouds. I mean, there's different things you can do. But I think credibility, if you know that somebody's been doing the work for a long time, they're probably pretty credible. If you know that there's a manager who has sort of deep knowledge, even if he hasn't been in that position for a specific, 5 to 10 years, they might have deep knowledge. It's just getting to know the people you're working with, and then combining that with their availability too. I think that those are the people that contribute to the content, and it could really help define what people need to know so that your solution is really impactful.
How do you deal with requests? For example, a lot of times people say we want digital learning, e-learning, but it probably doesn't fit in their particular case. It may be better doing instructor-led or mentored or some sort of hybrid learning. How do you work with that part of it in a project? Because that's going to be obviously at the beginning of a project what the final outcome will be. How do you work with the users who may think they want something, but they may not want the right thing?
That's very true. A lot of times people, will see a problem and they'll think training is the answer. So they create it to a large extent before they even come to you. And they ask you, can you help us with this? And this is what we think we'd like to do. So I think initially on a project, it's really important to listen. Obviously, a lot has come before you. So by listening and saying, how are you visualizing this project? What is it that you see? And why is it that e-learning is the best solution for your team? E-learning might very well be the best solution, but seeing how they visualize the project and the reasons why they've chosen what they've chosen, it might just be all they know, but getting the background for that, it might be because, it's what they're used to and they haven't seen other things. So you can say, I understand what you're trying to do. There are a few other things that I just wanted to expose you to just for your awareness. And let me present those to you. Let me, I think these things are good for you to know about because they could possibly save you time. They could possibly save you money. Equate it with something of value to them and suggest it, and then not tell them, but maybe offer it, or maybe be aware of, maybe we don't do it this time. Maybe we can do it next time, or maybe it's something you can think about. And then let it go, right? And then maybe focus on another aspect of the project, let it marinate, and then you might circle back. And a lot of times what's really interesting about just sort of planting seeds like that is that at some point in the future, they might come back to you with that idea as though it were their own. And you just agree with them. You just say, excellent idea. I love that approach. Why don't we try that? And just don't own it. Don't worry about it, right? It doesn't have to be something like, I said this, I told you this 3 months ago. But you just leave it alone, and you agree, and you accept it and embrace it, and then there they go.
And also maybe give them credit to other people in the organization, because I think that's something that goes down very well. If people get credit for the work that they do, it means an awful lot.
I think a lot of people are happy about that. It could be, maybe it plays into their goals too, right? Maybe just getting to know what their personal and or professional development goals might be, and helping them to reach those goals is really important. So by doing that, by looking at how people are doing the work on a project, if there's an opportunity for them to develop and get a new skill or get some experience that might really add to their, sort of professional progression, I think that's excellent. So then saying you have done this successfully is I think, a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Now, for somebody starting out in project management, especially from the learning world, and they have to work on projects and they have to work with clients, internal or external, what do you think the best way to get trained in project management would be?
I think there's an awful lot out there with formal training programs. I mean, LinkedIn Learning has some. There's professional organizations there's PMP certifications. So there's an awful lot out there where people can learn project management. I think that the organizations, there's a lot of organizations and associations that offer programs, and then there's smaller snippets of it too that are, I think, all over the place.
Now, do you find that Agile works best in an e-learning environment? E-learning development.
I worked on a substantive Agile project once, and it went on for several months. It was longer, and we did several. I probably did 5 different learning solutions within that time frame, and I think it worked well when they were all e-learning solutions, and I did work with a supplier to develop the solutions. So I do think that the Agile worked well. And the one interesting part about Agile is that it's always on deck, right? So you can do any part of what needs to be done in the project. So I think that's a very interesting approach, as opposed to know your role, right? I do design, right? You do development, you do something else. So understanding that is really important too, just to know how your work intersects with others and what that expectation is, so that you don't have any project conflicts, personal conflicts that arise.
Yep. Good. Well, believe it or not, we are out of time again. It goes fast. It goes really fast. Susan, if people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way to do it?
They're always welcome to look at my LinkedIn page. That's where I post these recordings, and they're welcome to do that. I have my email on my LinkedIn page. Okay. So I believe that I'm happy to have that shared, and that's probably the easiest way, because I think most people are on LinkedIn.
Okay, good. We'll have that in the links below. So if you need to get a hold of Susan or would like to get a hold of Susan, there she is. And well, that's great. Well, I'm glad you had some time for us again today. And project management's an interesting beast. And, everybody hates doing it, but you need it. You just really need it, because sometimes
you really do.
Sometimes things get out of hand, and if you haven't done it, or at least you're not up on it, it's probably a problem waiting to happen. But great. Well, we look forward to having you on again in the future, and best of success at everything you do. And Lesley, anything?
No, I just, that to me, project management was something that I got involved with from my very, very, very early days. Even when I was delivering face-to-face training in a college, in what you would call community education college, project management was actually really important because you had to fit in with all the other subjects, because whatever you were doing, whatever I was teaching in business entrepreneurship or business economics or marketing had to fit in with what the people were teaching in HR or whatever other subjects they were teaching. The timing had to be joined up.
And to avoid redundancy and everything else.
Yeah. And then, because otherwise students then think, oh, I've been told this 5 minutes ago or 2 weeks ago somewhere else, and now this person's telling me something different. So it actually, and people don't realize that actually applies even across teaching. Straightforward face-to-face teaching, what you're talking about is still incredibly relevant.
Right.
Yeah.
Very true. Well, it's my pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, you're welcome. And if you're watching the show, please give us your feedback, give us a thumbs up or down or whatever you do with your thumbs. And we will see you next week on eLearnChat. Have a good one, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.